stories of the previous prophets. Stories of the previous prophets. Now, how is this a miracle? How is it a miracle that he's talking about the stories of the previous prophets? For many reasons. First and foremost, one needs to realize how uneducated Arabia was. One needs to understand, when we think of, let's say, the jungles of Brazil, would they know the people in those lands that are cut off from civilization? Would they know the histories of medieval Europe, let's say? Think about it. That, of course, the problem now is you have the internet. When I imagine, and even by the way, those tribes don't have the internet. But I'm just imagine that you didn't have these means of communication, these means of connectivity, and you came across a civilization cut off from all others, and they know the histories of all other civilizations. Even the names of the Abrahamic prophets, the Judeo-Christian prophets, were not known to the Arabs. Why should they? Why should they know the stories of Yusuf and Yaqub? Why should they care about Ishaq? Why should that branch was unrelated to them? They preserved Ibrahim and Ismail, yes, right? But Ishaq onwards is irrelevant to them. Is that not correct, right? They have no idea. They have vague idea of Isa, but that's it. They don't know anything. And that is why when the Quraysh went to Medina and they said, give us some test quiz questions, one of the questions was, ask him about Yusuf and his brothers. Remember we did the whole tafsir of Yusuf. Ask him about, because who knows Joseph and his brothers? There was not a single library in all of Mecca, in all of Arabia. The Bible had not yet been translated into Arabic. Imagine this, right? There's not a single library in the entire peninsula. In the whole city of Mecca, less than 5 or 10 people can read and write. Even if they can read and write, there is no Bible to read. If they could even acquire it. Imagine all of this, right? In the middle of this environment, an unlettered shepherd with no education begins telling the detailed stories of the biblical flood, of Adam and Hawa, which was not something the Arabs cared about, of Ishaq and Yaqub and Yusuf, of Isa, of Musa. Look at how many stories of Musa in the Quran. And Allah mentions in the Quran, مَا كُنْتَ تَعْلَمُهَا أَنْتَ وَلَا قَوْمُكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ هَذَا. Neither you nor your people knew these stories before this Quran came down. And of the most interesting, tangible, if you like, evidences for this is that the Quran preserves some stories of Jesus Christ that are not found in the New Testament to this day, and yet were discovered recently in sources outside the New Testament. And I will give you some concrete examples. All of us as Muslims know the story of Isa speaking from his mother's cradle, from the hands of his mother. Most of us Muslims in this audience are not aware that this story is simply not found in the New Testament. It's not found. None of the Gospels of Matthew or Mark or Luke, none of them have it. Also, all of us as Muslims know that the Quran mentions in 3 occasions the story of Isa and the birds blowing into it and they becoming real birds. Again, you will be surprised as Muslims to know that this story is simply not mentioned in the canonical Christian Gospels. It's not found. And for the longest times, Christians would ridicule. Look at these Muslims, they have these weird and bizarre stories. Around 150 years ago, in Egypt, a interesting monastery was discovered in the desert. And in it there was the body of a monk from the 4th century CE, before the coming of Islam. 4th century CE. And the body of this monk belonged to a sect of Christianity that was lost, it's gone. And in the scrolls, sorry, not the scrolls, in the, what do you call it, the coffin, there were scrolls. That's what I meant to say. Multiple scrolls. And these scrolls contained Gospels that are beyond the 4 canonical Gospels. You guys following this? Of them is a Gospel, now you should know that Constantine and others in 325 CE, they basically got rid of all of the other Gospels. There were lots of Gospels. And Constantine ordered these four to be chosen. Others later after him, it's not just Constantine, but later. And these four became the canonical, all the rest were destroyed. And to this day, most of them are destroyed. Once in a while we come across something from the ancient times. This was one of the most significant discoveries in the 1870, I think. Some like basically last 19th century, 150 years ago. One of these Gospels was the Gospel of St. Thomas. And it is now available on Amazon. You can Google the Gospel of St. Thomas. It was one of the lost Gospels. And in the Gospel of St. Thomas, we have both of these stories. The story of Jesus speaking as a baby, and the story of the birds becoming real birds. And it is amazing that for literally 13 centuries, these stories were not known to any Christian community. Any. They're only found in the Quran. And yet, and this is not, I'm giving you a concrete example, look it up. Go look, buy the book, the Gospel of St. Thomas. Purchase it, read it for yourself. And you find these two stories are not found in the actual canonical Gospels, and yet they are found in the Gospel of St. Thomas. And as Allah says in the Quran, you were not there, you didn't know it, your people did not know it, but Allah gave you this wahi. And this is clearly a miracle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.